Good morning and welcome to the third talk. In the last talk, I provided an overview of the Western perspectives on sociolinguistics. So today I'll be sharing glimpses of some of our own research that have been produced over the past 20 years or more in Delhi by me and my students. I would not necessarily be evaluating this research with respect to the West. I might talk about the importance of the research in non-Western locations later, perhaps in my last talk. At first, I want to make a few observations about sociolinguistics. Okay. Why is this happening? Admit. Okay. Though sociolinguistics in India saw an upward surge, not able to move, right. So though sociolinguistics in India saw an upward surge, mainly due to the partnership of Gumfers, Pandit, and Eminu, it did not last beyond 1975. With the untimely demise of late Professor Prabodh Pandit, sociolinguistics in India took a downward step. It moved away from the trend set up by Pandit. Instead of taking the field forward, sociolinguistics activities in India became increasingly centered on the descriptive model of the 60s, that is the sociology of language, and without interrogating their suitability for the local realities of a multicultural India and the multicultural Asia, more generally. It took nearly 20 years for this trend to change once again. There's a growing body of new sociolinguistics research that has emerged over the past 20 years in Delhi. The research is mindful of the Eurocentric biases. It not only reconnects back with some of the pioneering research produced locally in India in the late 60s and early 70s, but has joined base with the growing sociolinguistics research in Asia Pacific. For further information, you are guided to some of my earlier research, which appeared in 2015, 21, 23, and some still in press going to appear this year. I have put a map here showing the locations from where we have produced work. So the triangles that you see, I'll put this one, yeah. So the triangles that you see here are the major sites that are part of our active research. You can see much of our research is concentrated in the contiguous regions of the easternly part of India, covering Indo-Aryan, Tibeto-Burman, and some contact languages born out of Indo-Aryan and Tibeto-Burman. As for the Dravidian, the coverage is limited and confined to a handful of studies. As of now, it is confined to Kerala. There is one study in progress focused on Hyderabad. More progress is possible if our students and young scholars come forward. I'm talking about the current research. Given the presence of an excellent philological tradition in India and the availability of ground materials from across India, especially in the south, the future is only bright. The figure to the right here shows the figures to the right show the growing footprints of published sociolinguistics research across Asia Pacific. This is Asia Pacific map, and this is the research which is growing in Asia Pacific. Now, this is a 3-year-old figure, but if I update this by adding more data, the figure would look more dense. And in addition, we have created 2 important collaborative platforms starting in 2010. I'm sorry, it's moving up on its own. Yeah, here. In addition, we created 2 important collaborative platforms starting in 2010 and 2015, where sociolinguistics research from Asia Pacific could be reported and published. The journal has become a Scopus indexed Q1 journal within 5 years. I'm happy to see the expanding footprints of the new sociolinguistics across Asia Pacific. This has drawn Western scholars' interest in the social linguistics of the region. I quote William Leboff on Asia Pacific. The history of social linguistics research leads us to expect certain patterns of variation by social class, age, and gender. But as the field expands to new societies with different social structures, we often encounter unexpected results. Such findings can have great value in leading to higher level generalizations. In addition, And this figure here, shows the present reach of the Journal of APLB. Excuse me. Sorry for that. Okay. So this figure here shows the present reach of the Journal of Asia Pacific Language Variation in terms of the regions from where research has been published in the journal. Some of the languages have also been researched. Some of these languages have also been researched as heritage languages in the north, shown in the dotted region here. And shown in the checkered blue is North America here, which has been the major and dominant center of knowledge production. While this has not affected the Eurocentric biases that still dominate the journals and the conferences in the North, APLB has succeeded in decentering by creating a new parallel knowledge base, which is firmly located in Asia Pacific and which happens to be home to multifaceted communities, as opposed to the regions dominated by English and other European languages. Asia Pacific is a rather fluid construction, covering much of South, as well as multifaceted communities of the North, as in Northern Australia, New Zealand, as well as Singapore. The use of global North and South are more for the sake of convenience and given their wide circulation. So today I'll showcase some of our research and outcomes with a focus on the socio-cultural factors that some of these communities have contributed to. And what does this research tell us about, or how does it further our understanding of the grammar and the linguistic processes involved, and our understanding of language change? First, a note that India is what I call a multilingual federation. It has no national language. Instead, Hindi and English serve as the official and associate official languages of the federation. Additionally, each constituent state of the federation has one or more official languages of its own. Delhi alone has 4 official languages. A few states have opted for English as their state official language. However, no state was monolingual at the time of reorganization of states. Mobility since then, both within and across state, has only intensified, taking every language everywhere. So it's a futile exercise to try to understand India and its states in terms of sameness of language and culture, regardless of the political rhetoric. It is well known that when Andhra was formed, it had substantial Kannada and Marathi speaking population. Now, with the formation of yet another state, Telangana, out of Andhra Pradesh, it remains to be seen whether or not language has emerged as a marker of new state identity, though state and media representations would like us to believe it. We'll know it soon as the dissertation research is in progress at IIT Delhi. Now I begin with some of our research on Vishnupriya, coming from a location called Hailakandi in south of Assam. But before I do that, a quick reminder for those who don't know much about this field, about what a variable is, since I'll be referring to it. A variable refers to 2 or more realizations of a single entity, which are similar in function and meaning. These occur in a variety of contexts, overlapping with each other. As these are not uniformly distributed across various contexts, a number of constraints then help us uncover the patterns of their distribution. So Vishnupriya as a contact language. While the early history of Vishnupriya has been full of speculation and popular beliefs, our research suggests that Vishnupriya developed out of mixed marriages between speakers of Eastern Indo-Aryan languages and a linguistically diverse Tibeto-Burman speaking population in what is known today as the state of Manipur. What complicates the story is the presence of Vishnupriyas in the contiguous regions of Myanmar, Bangladesh, Tripura, Assam, and Vishnupriya, and Vishnupriya having greater association with languages other than Manipuri or Meitei. What is uncontroversial, however, is our understanding that Vishnupriya developed as a result of arrival of Vaishnavism, is spread across the more easterly regions, and is adoption by the local communities. Based on our resources, we date the developments to around 1700 to 1800, but more research is underway. We use lexicon, structure, and other information to lock the mystery of Vishnupriya. So this is the graphic representation of how Vishnupriya must have developed. You could see here arrival of heterogeneous immigrant dialects, speaking varieties of Eastern Indo-Aryan languages. So it's difficult to pinpoint which Eastern Indo-Aryan language it is. It could be Assamese plus Bangla plus any of the other Eastern Indo-Aryan languages. And because we are talking about adoption of Vaishnavism or Vaishnavite sect in this part of the region, the lingua franca, one of the lingua franca, a new lingua franca must have emerged as the language of the religion. And in due course of time, as a result of bilingualism between the local Tibeto-Burman languages and the Eastern Indian languages coming into this part of the region, we find a new bilingualism developed. And the Vishnupriya that we are talking about, they are no longer there in Manipur, but they are all located in south of Assam and elsewhere, where they came in secondary contact, perhaps with Bengali. Maybe they had a contact with Bengali earlier itself because of given the history of the education in the region. And now there is a new bilingualism that has happened with the gradual loss of competence over the Tibeto-Burman languages that their predecessors might have spoken. So research into the easterly regions of India has been a journey into the social linguistics of Indian communities, which began for me in Assam. It has been a rewarding and learning experience, which has been growing. I spent many years trying to understand the local linguistic situation across the region. I'd been going to Assam and other regions routinely every year until the COVID struck all of us. I'm grateful to all my students who carried this research further and helped in various ways in making local contacts and providing assistance during the fieldwork. For work on Vishnupriya, I must thank various people. Professor Dongre from Deccan College, who first introduced me to Vishnupriya when he was visiting our department in Assam University. My colleagues, such as one from Manipuri Department, Assam University, Professor Manihar Singh, for exposing me to the history of the movement of Vishnupriya Meitei conflict and educating me about Assam Sahitya Sabha and the literature it produced in the early years. And leaders of the local community, especially my colleague, late Professor K.P. Sinha from Sanskrit Department, also Assam University, for introducing me to the Vishnupriya community. It is this initial work in a Vishnupriya settlement adjoining Silchar, which paved the way for our future work on Vishnupriya in another location. It is to Nazreen Laskar's credit, my former student, and the fieldwork that she undertook in Helakandi adjoining Silchar. So these are the three factors that make Vishnupriya distinct, unique and distinct from other Indo-Aryan languages, even within the East. One is the NP structure of Vishnupriya, the ordering of its constituents. Two, the variable classifier marking. And three, the rise of an identity movement in Manipur over state ownership, like Vishnupriya, but not Manipuri. So the, right. So one is the order of the NP constituents. Vishnupriya shows a variable word order such that one or more nominal modifiers can either precede, as in one, or follow, as in two, or may be distributed on both sides of the head noun, as in four. Thus, Vishnupriya, despite having an OV word order, shows variability in morpheme order in NP and tends to lean towards the Tibeto-Burman pattern. Of course, Tibeto-Burman does not constitute a homogeneous group. Second, presence of pronominal clatics, as in 5. 3, classifiers in Vishnupriya, colored items in 2 and 5, are not unique, but they work a bit differently from the known Indo-Aryan languages that have been researched by us so far. So the NPs in Vishnupriya tend to lean towards the Tibeto-Burman pattern, where the numerals and the demonstratives favor post-nominal positions and the adjectives favor pre-nominal positions. Talking about the locus of marking, the classifiers may be located on the head, on one or more dependents, or on none. That means they could be bare, unmarked NPs. The variation in marking is constrained by the structure of the NP itself. The bare NPs were not coded for all the speakers. However, simply given the profusely huge amount of numbers. However, the results, even when compared for individual speakers, are fairly consistent. So the overall rate of marking varies according to the NP types. For example, the bare NPs are the least marked of all the NP types. And among the modified NPs, the double modified NPs attract much higher marking in comparison with the single modified nouns. So, right. And then two categories of NPs, the single modified and double modified, behave differently with respect to head and dependent marking. So this is second factor which sort of governs this variability. So both NP types show greater dependent marking, whether it's a single modified NPs or double modified NPs, we find much more marking on the dependent. However, in double modified NPs, the dependent marking is much higher compared to the single modified NPs. And also there is much less head marking and zero marking among the double modified NPs, suggesting much greater marking. The differences in the greater marking in the case of double modified NPs can be attributed to greater dependent marking. We also explored the role of discourse level information structure, but we didn't find any systematic influence that could be attributed to the such factors like information structure. So there are two kinds among the double modified NPs, those with a pronominal clitic that we call pronominalized NPs, and those without a pronominal clitic, hence non-pronominalized NPs. Okay, so in 10 minutes, I think we would be logging out. All right. The pronominalized NPs and NPs with full numeral forms behave differently from the non-pronominalized NPs. The pronominalized NPs and numeral NPs are categorically marked, accounting for as much as 89% of the total classifier marking. The instances of zero marking are contributed entirely by the non-pronominalized NPs, which show very little marking. The marking in non-pronominalized NPs appears to be significantly conditioned by the order of the NP constituents, with pre-modified NPs favoring either zero marking or more head marking, and the distributed NPs favoring greater dependent marking on the post-nominal modifier. This is parallel to the effects seen in the single modified NPs. The categorical marking of the pronominalized NPs is attributed to the categorical marking on the clitics and numerals, which alone attract maximum marking. The categorical marking on clitics is explained in terms of the clitic boundaries, which coincide with the post-nominal positions that favor classifier marking. In this sense, there is actually a great parallel in classifier marking patterns among different categories of NPs. Though the clitics were treated as modifiers for the purposes of identifying double modified NPs, these were not considered for the purpose of identifying the word order. Okay, moving on. Apart from the linguistic factors that I just pointed out, there are 3 social factors that turned out to be significant, and these include gender, occupation, and birth year. Among the single modified NPs, for instance, we find overall women show greater marking. The differences, however small, are significant, and the difference is maintained across different modifiers. A comparison with our 4 earlier specimens of Vishnupriya, taken from Grierson, for instance, points to remarkable stability of variable word order and overall marking patterns in real time. That means from 1900 to something like that, until 1950, suggesting continuity in grammar in terms of the role of linguistic constraints on marking. However, quantitative changes have occurred over time in each of the NP categories, affecting both the single and double modified NPs. The 2 key shifts are: 1, rise in the dependent marking, and rise in the pronominalized NPs, both of which mark Vishnupriyas distinct from Indo-Aryan and take them closer to the Tibeto-Burman languages. These shifts seem to coincide with the rise of an identity movement and how it unfolded over time. The Vishnupriyas and Meiteis in Assam have been involved. I'm sorry, there is some background noise. So just a minute. Okay, I'm back. There are 5 minutes left before the system will log us out. So shall we log out now and rejoin again after 5 minutes? I think that would be better instead of being disconnected in the middle of it, right? So I'm stopping here and we rejoin at the next time, whatever they have given us, okay?
Okay, after 5 minutes.
Yes. I guess you are able to see my screen. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So right. So we were talking about the variability that exists in the NP marking with reference to classifiers in Vishnupriya. And after discussing the various 3 or 4 linguistic constraints, which come from the very structure of NP itself. Now I move on to talk about the social cultural factors. And I said 3 factors turned out to be significant. One of them includes gender and occupation and birth year. So talking about time, right, birth year, when we compare it with the earlier available specimens, we can see there is a remarkable stability of the variable word order and the overall marking patterns in real time, suggesting a lot of huge amount of continuity of grammar in terms of the role of linguistic constraints on marking. However, we also notice that quantitative changes have occurred over time in each of the NP categories, affecting both the single and double modified NPs. 2 key shifts that we notice are, as shown here, rise in the dependent marking over time in each of the NP categories, affecting both the single and the double modified NPs. Sorry. Yeah, I missed it. The 2 key shifts that you see here, one includes rise in dependent marking and rise in the pronominalized NPs marking. Both of these mark Vishnupriya distinct from Indo-Aryan and take them closer to the Tibeto-Burman languages. These shifts seem to coincide with the rise of an identity movement and how it unfolded over time. The Vishnupriyas and Meiteis in Assam have been involved in a long conflict which arose soon after the formation of the state of Manipur and its new tribal identity. The Meiteis and the Vishnupriyas, who forged a single identity for long, saw a split between those aligning themselves with the tribal and the state identity and those carrying both Vishnupriya and Manipuri identity. The non-Vishnupriya Meiteis, on their part, denied the Manipuri identity to the Vishnupriyas and also denied them state benefits such as reservations. The conflict is long gone now. So what is the connection between the birth year and the movement? It's a movement, first of all, led by middle class, and like any identity movement, a movement led from above. Several people have contributed to the movement across the community. First, the oldest group includes those who were born in the pre-independent India. This is essentially the pre-conflict period. The second group is really at the transition period, and perhaps the identity movement is at relatively quiescent or the quietest period. The period saw pro-Bengali movements in this part of Assam, the Banga Vibhajan, resulting in recognition of Bengali as the state language, as opposed to Assamese alone. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that this period saw the questions of Vishnupriya taking a backseat. It was only in the aftermath of 1961, when the linguistic redistribution of states happened, that the issue of Vishnupriya versus Manipuri came to the center stage once again, and an identity movement started building up. This is also the period which produced new leaders. It is here that we notice an upward shift, first in the pronominalized NPs, followed by a shift across the board. Both increase in dependent marking in single modified NPs and marking of the pronominalized NPs constitute key factors that separate Vishnupriya from local Bengali vernaculars that are part of their Indo-Aryan inheritance. These also take them closer to Tibeto-Burman typologically at the same time. In this sense, these have become the covert markers of ethno-linguistic identity of Vishnupriya. Vishnupriyas are very aware of who they are. They do not want to become Meitei, but they are not Bengali either. In addition to language, there is also much cultural continuity in terms of cuisine, weaving, and cultural performances. And we know that once ethnic language carries cultural content, it is less expandable in this role. Further, the self-assertion of identity is amply immortalized in the numerous casual self-references as Manipuri or Vishnupriya Manipuri, and to the Meiteis as Burmese Manipuris. Okay, so This was the story on part of the story on Vishnupriya. Now I bring you another example from on Malayalam, spoken in a village called Cherukanam in central Karnataka. There are two people viewing. Admit. Okay. How do I get rid of this screen? I'm not sure. I would request people to join on time, because since I'm the host, it's very difficult for me to pay attention to both the people who want to admit as well as talk. And my screen is getting, I don't know what's happening. I'm not able to see my screen. Anyway, I'll ignore that. I am not able to move. Yeah. My screen is not able to move. My screen is frozen here. That is because people are constantly entering. Yeah, here. Right. Okay. So now I move on to a study on Malayalam. So Malayalam and other Dravidian languages have a continuous grammar writing tradition between the 1850s and 70s embedded in Indology, as we all know. This should serve as a motivation to undertake research on phonological variation, which involves both phonology and morphology. Though such grammars have observed and written about various phonological processes, there are also differences in their accounts, suggesting complexity of the processes requiring different tools and fresh investigations. So many of these issues remain unresolved. And Sunny's work, which is reported here, fills this gap. She addresses the issue of various phonological processes, such as voicing, weakening, deletion, total nasal assimilation, etc., by adopting a data-based quantitative approach. She shows that though medial position favors voicing, for instance, as suggested in earlier grammars, it is not confined to medial position alone, but also extends to initial position as well. Likewise, she also refutes Mohanan's assertion that non-branching, non-initial onsets are voiced. Her study compares well with the Western studies, as she makes use of the standard and spoken categories as well as style. So she provides a comprehensive empirical account of these processes, going beyond what is known, whether word-based or syllable-based accounts. So as an example, I'll focus on voicing. So here are some examples, contrasting the literary variety with the spontaneous speech, and you could see various processing operating in the spontaneous speech. Okay, and this slide shows the overall variation in the voiceless unaspirated stops. And as you could see in the highlighted, I'll just pick up this, yeah, in this part, right, that there is a considerable variation. And it's only about 54% of the eligible, of the available voiceless aspirated stop that show voicing. So there's a great deal of variation showing almost 50-50 distribution, right? And to account for this variation, she tested her data for a large number of phonological, grammatical, and morphological constraints and subjected them to a multivariate analysis. Her analysis showed the presence of both the categorical and variable constraints. A large number of constraints turned out to be significant, which include place of articulation, preceding and following segments, simultaneous influence of preceding and following constraints, word position, grammatical category, role of stem versus affix, etc. Their comparative effect and a hierarchy of constraints is evident in her results as displayed here. You could see the strongest effect here, retroflex near categorical marking, and you could also see a very strong effect of the approximants and so on. So here are some more constraints that she tested. And as we know, historical linguistics is increasingly adopting data-driven and quantitative approaches to test many of the earlier reported or believed outcomes. And Sunny's work and several such studies done here show the way forward. There is another study based on historical inscriptions of Kannada, which maps various changes in approximants. It's an unpublished manuscript produced by T. Satyanath in 1989. My own study of sound shifts across Bengal and in the history of Indo-Aryan are similar attempts. And also Priya Chahal's work on comparative dialect geography of Indo-Aryan and other languages across India make use of quantitative approaches to understand the sound shifts and the kind of distributional patterns that it has created across languages in India. So here are two other interesting findings that emerged from this study. You could see here that she has plotted the results using read speech and spontaneous speech, which remind us of the typical continuum and the stylistic continuum, right? So her study assumes significance as she tested style by drawing upon both read speech and spontaneous speech. We do see a sharp decline in the reading task, as would be expected, but this pattern is produced not by the attention paid to speech, as one would like to believe, but it is due to the attention paid to the written word. Besides, there is no negative evaluation attached with the spontaneous speech, nor is the literary style evaluated more positively. And most of you know that for Dravidian languages, the divide between the literary and the spoken is something where you have to learn the literary through education only. Now, population of Cherukkulam, where Sunny carried out her study, comprises many groups such as Christianity, mainly Catholics and Jacobites, but also Hindus, various groups like Nayars, Parayas, Azavas, etc., as well as both patrilineal and matrilineal communities. There are no Brahmins in the village. However, Nayars are considered as a dominant caste group. Much has been written about the Nayar women and their status they traditionally enjoyed. To test the salience of caste and gender, Sunny selected two speakers each, one male and female, from two Christian and two Hindu groups. This was her pilot. Much of the research that is reported on gender has come from patrilineal societies, and Cherukkulam presents a site, sorry, the spelling error here. Cherukkulam presents a site where both patrilineal and matrilineal groups coexist. So here are the results, and the way we read them is we have to see Nayar woman versus other women and Nayar woman versus Nayar men. So though caste and gender on their own did not emerge as significant factors in this study, a cross-tabulation shows interesting results, however small this might be. So here we see some evidence that Nayar women behave differently from women of other castes or sects. Their behaviors seem to be more closely aligned with that of men of the other group. For instance, the Nayar women are ahead of other women in the use of weakening, deletion, and nasal assimilation, but lag behind other women in voicing. The findings add a unique dimension to what we know about language and gender by bringing in a matrilineal society community. This unique behavior of Nayar women also makes the behavior of Nayar men as marked. The results suggest a combination of caste and gender together account for the observed variation across social groups than gender or caste or sect alone or in isolation. Another series of studies by Kumar, 2021 and ongoing on Bihar, especially on Maithili speaking region, have shown that caste does not work in isolation of other factors, thus affirming findings of Pandit from Gujarat. If in Cherukunam, it is a complex interplay of caste and gender and matriarchy. In Bihar, a large number of factors include internal mobility, occupation, education, gender, and age, along with linguistic factors, which provide a better model of social differentiation of speech. Further, in Cherukunam, respondents could not judge the caste based on speech, despite talking a lot about caste-based approximatives and telling stories. Similar findings have been reported on other groups on various sites in India as well. Kumar sampled 4 caste groups: Brahmins, Bhumihars, Yadavs, and Rams, supposedly differing in their social ranking in a Maithili-speaking region. The study focused on variation in honorificity marking as reflected in verb agreement and on double object marking in Maithili. The findings suggest that though caste is salient, it interacts with profession among other factors. As a result, a Brahmin speech, for instance, may vary depending on his profession. Contrary to the expectation, gender and education levels did not turn out to be significant. Kumar also reports that Grierson missed this fact and suggested differences between the speech of Maithili Brahmins and non-Brahmins. There's a change in progress, showing decline in honorificity marking among younger generations across caste groups. In addition, an array of linguistic constraints account for the observed variation. So without going into much details of research on caste, showing differences between Brahmins and non-Brahmin caste, as has been claimed in the past, I would just mention that both Sunny and Kumar's work, coming from 2 different locations, affirm Pandit's finding that caste does not work in isolation. Now I bring you 2 more studies. One is going back to Vishnupriya, language change. So I'm talking about now language change in a bilingual context. So for that, I would cite one study from Vishnupriya again by Laskar and the other study on Malayalam by Catherine. So talking about Vishnupriya first. So in this is a study from Laskar, who reports on variation in tense, mood, and aspectual system, and similar forms that mark them in Vishnupriya. She also drew additional data from so you could see on this table, right, that you have, for example, I'm focusing on past tense here, that you have multiple markers that perform the same function. So BP here refers to Vishnupriya and HP refers to Helakandi Bengali. Okay. She also drew additional data from the local Bengali spoken by the Bengalis in Hailakandi, as well as Bengali spoken by the Vishnupriyas, as they have been living in a Bengali-speaking region in this part of the country. This is an interesting location, as it is possible to find Meitei, Bengali, and Vishnupriya villages coexisting in close vicinity of each other. I'll only discuss some of the important findings by drawing upon on past tense marking alone. While the markers themselves are shared between Vishnupriya and local Eastern Bengali, there are important differences in the overall TMA systems of the 2. Vishnupriya shows a hybrid of Tibeto-Burman system based more on the realist and irrealist distinctions, as well as retaining some of the features of the Indo-Aryan system. The difference is important considering that the local Bengali itself is located in a Tibeto-Burman ecology. See Satyanath, present and ongoing, and the work in 2024. There is an additional past tense form in Vishnupriya, but I would ignore that for the time being. So as you could see here in this table, that one of the striking differences that emerges between Vishnupriya and Hailakandi, despite sharing the same markers for past tense, that Vishnupriya makes much greater use of la to mark past, whereas Hailakandi Bengali uses more of sa. So they show an opposition and a striking contrast with each other. And the awareness of the distinctness perhaps is crucial for maintaining the difference between two superficially closely related speech varieties, at least lexically. Okay, so considering that Vishnupriyas are bilingual in Vishnupriya and state language Bengali, Laskar used the bilingual language use itself as one of the conditioning variables, which turned out to be significant. What you see here is Vishnupriya speaking in Vishnupriya, Vishnupriya speaking in Bengali, and the third one marks the switch points from Vishnupriya to Bengali. We find it's fairly common, for example, regional languages constantly mixing with English and English mixing with regional languages. And this is something which happens in any multilingual environment where there are more than one or two languages available at people's disposal. So we find a constantly moving in and out of the linguistic resources. And that is what Laskar took advantage of. I mentioned in the first talk that we are replicators, but imperfect replicators. Here, Vishnupriya seemed to be aware at some level of difference between Vishnupriya and Bengali. If it is true that we tend to replicate, however imperfect, the observed frequencies in our behavior, it also implies that we estimate those frequencies, perhaps. Here, when making a switch, the Vishnupriya speakers overestimate the difference and, as a result, end up overshooting the target, which results in this kind of behavior. So you could see, we saw in the previous slide that there is a sharp contrast, right? And here, so they're making a distinction when they speak in Bengali, but whenever the shift occurs, then there is a switch occurs, there is a much higher usage of sa. So that means they are trying to show, overestimate and emphasize this shift towards the other system, which is different from the language that they're speaking. Okay, so here when making a switch, the Vishnupriya speakers overestimate the difference and overshoot the target, resulting in this kind of behavior. This is not a surprising finding, but an interesting one, which requires further probe. And the awareness of distinctness perhaps is crucial for maintaining the difference between the two superficially closely related speech varieties, superficially at least lexically. Now we move on to another study, which is about the acquisition of home language Malayalam in a migrant context. So this study by Michael is about the acquisition of Malayalam among locally born 2 generations of Malayalis in Delhi. The study draws on 3 families. In 2 families, one of the parent is a migrant and the other is Delhi born. In the 3rd family, both the parents are migrants and children present the first locally born generations. The 4 children from these families belong to ages 5, 9, and 13 years of age. The study also draws comparable data from equal number of children born and raised in Kerala, 7, 10, and 13 years, and 1 young adult of 22 years. The focus of the study is on the acquisition of nasals. So as we all know, Malayalam makes a 6-way distinction in nasals at labial, dental, alveolar, retroflex, palatal, and velar places of articulation. Though children as young as 7 have acquired all the nasals and can produce as well as distinguish between various nasals, as Catherine's experiments recorded, including the dental and alveolar nasals, there is an increase in the use of alveolar nasals in place of dentals, palatals, and retroflexes. The use and distribution of various nasals is reported to be conditioned by a series of constraints. The dental nasals, for instance, reportedly contrast with alveolars as geminates, but as single consonants show an allophonic relationship with dental nasals occurring only initially, and alveolars elsewhere. Other nasals are also constrained significantly by a number of factors as reported in Michael. We also notice here a rise in the use of alveolars across generations. The figure shows the acquisition of nasals in one of the families with an older child of 13 years of age. The migrant mother is in her late 40s, and the father, the first locally born generation, is in his early 50s. However, the increase is not random. In the case of geminates, though there is no shift in the first generation, the second Delhi-born generation records a huge drop in the use of expected dentals. In the word initial position, we find a small shift in the first generation and a steeper shift in the next generation. The shift has affected the earlier distributional relationships attested in the speech of the baseline migrant speakers. A comparison with the Kerala-born children in similar age groups suggests that the presence of alveolar nasals in different nasal categories is indeed part of a developing pattern. The shifts, however, are relatively small, and the alternations appear by the age of 10 years. But this does not happen in the case of Delhi-born generations. Therefore, among the Malayali children, acquiring their own home language, but in a new multilingual speech community, suggests a generational change in a migrant context. There is no reason to expect that these are transient patterns which will disappear in a few years later. The question is not whether greater exposure to Hindi is responsible for this shift, but that the children growing in Delhi do not have optimal access to relevant peer as they would have it in Kerala to ensure stabilization of a developmental pattern in the expected direction. What is a developmental pattern in the home context has become a cross-generational change in progress in a migrant context, despite input being available from the migrant patterns. And the location from where Michael drew her data or carried out this study, Malayalam is used extensively in the neighborhood among Malayali children, but also it is extensively used at home in addition to English and Hindi. Families live in a housing society amid a large concentration of Malayali-speaking families from Kerala, providing positive environment for the use of the Malayalam. They also have extensive family contact networks in Kerala, but that doesn't seem to be enough here. So therefore, among the Malayali children, acquiring their own home language, but in a new multilingual speech community suggests a generational change in a migrant context. As I said, there is no reason to believe that these are transient patterns which will appear a few years later. That won't happen because of the reason that I just said, that they don't have optimal access to relevant peer that was required, right? And that they would have, which they would have in Kerala, and to ensure stabilization of a developmental pattern in the expected direction. It would be wrong to call it a fossilized system. On the contrary, it's a new dynamic system moving ahead. The findings have wider implications showing progressive mergers and creating polysemy. So this study, findings of this study together with Vishnupriya Bengali bilingualism that we just saw have wider implications for understanding of language and cognition, and how we learn what we learn, and how we know what we know, and what constitutes targets for learning. Seven minutes. Shall we move on to the next study, or shall we log out? There's still 7 minutes, so I guess we can continue. Okay. Now I bring some research from, again, from the more easterly parts of the country, Nagamese, which is spoken in a multilingual Kohima town, and I talk about the ongoing changes. And this study is significant for various reasons. One, it shows, first of all, it is one of the rare studies which actually samples a multilingual speech community by drawing data from as many as 11 or 13 groups. Out of these, 16 or more groups that are present there, Naga groups. Two, it talks about changes in progress, two changes which are ongoing. It also talks about the variation in intra and intergroup, and it addresses the issues of the actuation of change, where it finds multiple trajectories. It also addresses the issue of who are the innovators. In addition, it talks about rise of a new urban identity and absence of ethnolegs. So these are the key points that I would be highlighting as I talk about this. So here is a figure which shows how the population of the Kohima town grew from the 51 to the present, whatever it is. The urban and the linguistic histories of Kohima town are interrelated. Kohima as a town came into existence in 1878 as a result of the British setting up their administration in Kohima and making Nagaland part of the Assam province. Assamese was mainly spread through administration and education. This language spread also resulted in the emergence of the new hybrid language called Nagamese. Though the history of early British contact goes back to 1880, the population of Kohima grew slowly but steadily only after it became the capital of the Nagaland in 1963. You could see that in the figure where I have put a circle. This one. Okay. English is the official language of the state today. Nagamese has no official recognition, though it is used everywhere. Assamese is no longer a part of the administration or education. People started migrating to Kohima in order to take up jobs in the government sector or to set up trade and businesses here. There are at least 70 Naga groups with distinct languages and cultures, which can all be found in Kohima. Hence, a small town of about 100,000 inhabitants, more than 20 Naga languages, and in total more than 100 languages were attested in Census 2001. A common linguistic bond linking all ethno-linguistic groups in the town is Nagamese. There's also a growing trend of inter-ethnic marriages. The increased use of Nagamese in Kohima is the result of the growing diversity of its inhabitants. If you are locked out, don't bother, come back again. But I'm continuing. The initial survey suggests that Kohima is a young town. Its non-Angami population may be broadly divided into 5 groups as reflected in the sample studied in the paper. 1, those above 40 years and born during 40s and 60s. This group includes the local Angamis and those who migrated at the age of 20 to 30 or so for work or post-marriage in the case of women. We would not find many people above 60 years who have been continuously residing in Kohima town. It is possible that the older generation moved back to their respective villages after retirement. Then we find those below the age of 40 and mostly in their 30s and 20s who were born during the 70s and 80s and who probably migrated at the age of 10 or earlier. A third group of locally born, generally aged 15 and younger, born during 90s and early 2000 to migrant parents. Some 20-year-old were also born in the city. Then there are also recent arrivals, including many short-term migrants for some short-term training, etc. So we are logging out here. Please join back. Whatever the time is given to you, in 2 minutes from now, join back.
2 minutes.
Yeah. All right. So we are back, and I'll just walk you back. Right. So this is what we are talking about now, 2 ongoing changes in Kohima town. Just quickly, this is I told you about how the histories of the population of the town and the changes that we at Nagamese are intertwined. and Nagamis emerge essentially in an urban locale as a result of growing diversity. And anyone who is interested in knowing more about it, they can look at my paper, which appeared in 2018. Anyone who is interested, I'll share the references. Okay. So we talk about now two changes, which involves an alternation between two first-person pronouns. Right. So there's an alternation between two first-person pronouns. Assamese first plural ami was reanalyzed as singular, resulting in variation between the two forms. Both can be pluralized in Nagamese by adding an Assamese classifier khan to the two variants. So there are two forms, mui and ami. Their function in Assamese, they function as singular versus plural, whereas in Nagamese, they are both reanalyzed as singulars, and both can be made plural by adding a marker called Khan, which happens to be a classifier in Assamese. Many Naga languages have and the second change involves an alternation between the possessive Laga and its reduced form La. Both innovations are internal developments of Nagamese. Many Naga languages have a three-way distinction in number marking, as opposed to a two-way distinction between singular and plural, as we find in Assamese or many other Indo-Aryan languages. It is this distinction in the number morphology which is responsible for the reanalysis of the personal pronouns and the changes that were initiated. And second change is guided by the syllabic structure of Naga languages. Actually, this is my earlier explanation that I had proposed, that both the changes are guided by the syllabic structure, but I have changed that, having correlated with other changes in a study which is in press, and maybe it is out by this time. Okay, so we are talking about two changes, one in the first person pronouns and the other one is in the Laga and La, which mark the possession. Okay, so here you could see the progression of this change from across 10 different Naga groups and I've organized the data here according to the birth years and the age. So the two variables here show a similar trend. Older groups overall use more Ami than Laga. For those in the age group of 31 to 40 years, Mui and La are the new leading variants. Thereafter, the changes steadily advances among the subsequent generations, whether locally born or arriving young, nearing completion in the speech of those locally born during 90s and later. The two changes therefore coincide with a spurt in the population growth. Despite the fact that Assamese arrived in Assam in 1860s, the population of the town witnessed significant increase only in the 60s and onwards. Thus, the changes seem to be an outcome of the increased mobility, diverse population, and presence of younger speakers. It follows then that the shifts in favor of Mui and La among those aged 30 and 40 were contributed by young adults and adolescents rather than those locally born. In my sample, those born during 68 and 77 were born in districts outside Kohima and had spent at least 15 to 20 years by 2008 when they were interviewed. However, ungrouping the individuals shows presence of much greater variation within and across age groups. This is particularly conspicuous among the older age groups. So the older Angami speakers here do not seem to have a single norm that they are aiming at. The two forms were strong competitors in the 60s. You could see here a great deal of variation, right? They're aiming at different forms. Here I have plotted data for the hours, and hours show even greater variability across age groups, particularly among the older speakers and those born before 78. Then here I have plotted data from various groups, and we see here presence of much greater variation within and across older age groups. There is also variation across linguistic groups, as you could see here. Owls, Angamis, I've compared them, Lothas, etc. We do not find evidence of one particular group playing a major role in shaping the outcomes either. We also do not find evidence of ethnolets. The variation is not entirely surprising given their varied histories of learning and using Nagamis, their social sphere of interaction, and their mobility. Even if individuals came to Kohima, let's say already knowing Assamese and Nagamis, they found themselves using more Nagamis than they did before, because they all came from relatively monolingual and monocultural settings. Besides, there was a very small minority that learned Assamese through education. Such a group was soon outnumbered in the early 60s, as a majority of them learned it informally. Here we see a total different picture this basically allows us to address the issue of actuation of change. So you could see here that the eventual shift here. The eventual shift at the bottom from the alternations involving two pronominal and two possessive forms seems to have followed multiple paths, as evident in the multiple patterns observed across older speakers. These include 1. Shift affecting possessive alone. 2. Shift in possessive reaching completion without a parallel shift in pronouns. 3. Shifts affecting both pronouns and possessive with three possibilities. A. Shift in possessives leading shift in pronouns for 10 speakers. B. Shift in pronouns leading shift in possessive for 7 speakers. And C. Shift affecting pronouns and possessive simultaneously and uniformly with little variation, 22 speakers. Now, what about the motivation for the change? There is little evidence to believe that the pronominal and possessive variants have their origins in geographic dialects. Similarly, there is little evidence to support that the variation is modeled on individual Naga languages so as to warrant ethnolects. The changes are guided by particular morphologies of Naga languages and the CVV and the CV as the preferred syllabic structures. Having said all this, the possible reasons for the unfocused seen in the beginning stage is because the change under consideration is itself contingent upon another change, which is a precursor to the change under discussion. The present change doesn't take off until the restructuring of number morphology is complete and the stage is set for alternation between Ami and Mui, with the two becoming similar in function and meaning. Likewise, in the case of Laga to La, it requires restructuring within the case marking system for possession. There's a shift here from morphological marking to lexical marking, which slowly eliminates other ways of marking profession. This is a shift in my explanation and in my understanding from the ones that I had proposed earlier. Earlier, I had attributed the changes to the role of isolating morphology and the predominantly monosyllabic structures favoring C and CVV types, which results in transforming Ami to Mui and Laga to La. But I think for any change, there are other changes as precursors which are responsible for this. Okay. Moving to another location in Kohima, which is called Kohima Village. Compared to Kohima town that we just talked about, Kohima Village is essentially monoethnic and Angami speaking. Now, it's a sharp contrast to what we just saw. It's a clan-based society where 4 major clans live together, occupying different parts or different territories of the village. The village is very small in size and the population, and both size and population, and yet we find clan-based differentiation in speech in this small village of the population of meager 15,000. The village practices clan-based exogamy, whereby women marry across the clan and settle down in the husband's clan. Despite being a patriarchy, women continue to speak their matrilect post-marriage, and children are not socially instructed to speak necessarily father's dialect. or father select. There is, so the affricates and fricatives show here alternations between alveolars and palatals before vowels A and O. This we discussed in my earlier talk that Angami shows three different kinds of distributional relationships between the alveolars and palatal. In some context, they are allophonic. In some context, they're phonemic. And before I and O, they seem to be variable. Right. Apart from tonal phonology and vowels, it is the clan genealogy of a family, which is one of the most powerful explanatory factor, stronger than tone phonology. The puzzle of palatalization in Tibeto-Burman is an old one and remains unresolved. And one major reason for that is that palatals are attested all over the vowel space across Tibeto-Burman. A first step towards resolution to the puzzle requires understanding the dynamics of the local communities and the social physical mobility in space that has taken place over time. This table shows the distribution of alveolars and palatals across 4 clans. And you could see here, despite being a small village, that we find significant variations with reference to how the use of alveolars and palatals are distributed across clans. And we also see that 2 clans, LNT and DNT, pattern similarly, based on which we call them alveolar clans or palatal clans. The exogamy has further complicated the clan composition of families and contributed to increased variation and presence of social links. While clan marriages bring partners from different clans together, giving rise to as many as 16 possible different combinations as shown here. Same clan marriages bring partners from same clans together, adding additional 4 types, as shown on the right side. It is important to note that the 4 clans live in close vicinity of each other without significant geographic distance. So density of communication, as believed by the earlier dialect geography, doesn't really eliminate differentiation, or it's not a sufficient condition. Sokri studied 5 variables by drawing data from a sample, balancing and representing various possible marriage combinations. She then coded data for family background, recording all relevant social information like father's clan, mother's clan, specific intra-clan or inter-clan family background, among other factors, and also various other factors to model the observed variation. This is based on Sokri's 216 study, which shows evidence of both stable variation, which reveals one's clan identity, as well as changes in progress, which blur such distinctions. Further, one of the changes has its origin in the mixed clan families and has also spread to the same clan families where children have no exposure to the palatal variants within the family. In fact, both the, here is only one change that I'm showing. Okay. By adding more data from younger speakers shows further progression of change among younger generations. The first shift, as we saw on the previous slide, is contributed by women and originates in mixed families. Here, the family clan background is the most significant factor that explains the variation. However, as we expand the data set and focus on younger speakers, as shown here, the shift is being led by male speakers, though once again being led by those from one of the mixed families. This time, it is the increased social contact and type of schooling that have a stronger effect over family clan background. Overall, birth year, school environment, clan composition of family, and gender are significant factors. Sorry. And however, maximum peltalization is attended among those who attended Kohima village with predominantly Angami population than those who went to mixed schools or studied in Kohima town. So in short, what this study actually tells us is that even small places could show considerable diversity, whether it's a Kohima town comprising around a 1 lakh population or a Kohima village containing as small as 15,000 of population. And in one case, the variation is caused by the diversity of the population moving in from rest of the districts of Nagaland, whereas in the other case, it is the presence of 4 different clans living together in the same village. What is interesting about the second story about Kohima villages, to which I have added further analysis going beyond what Suokri just presented here, that when we talk about progression of change, we also have to see what happens between 2 stages. And so from one stage to the next, and from that stage to the next, and so on and so forth. Instead of believing that one form comes from the blue and then it progresses smoothly without really affecting the grammar. Here we actually see that the leaders have changed in the 2 stories. That means in the first, if you only look at the parents and the children who were born in the 40s and the 80s, we find a change being led by women coming from mixed families or mixed clan marriages. But as we move on to include more and more younger speakers who were born in 2000 and beyond, we find now the change is being spread because of increased contact and socialization. And the reason is that school and churches and who you play with, who you have friends with, that is much more important. In fact, in the second half, if you look at the younger speakers, it is no longer the clan background is important, but it is not the most significant factor. It is the socialization and the contact and the nature of schooling that takes over the family clan composition. So the story of change, when we talk about, we have a lot to learn, and that can happen as we expand our understanding of the speech communities, taking synchronic apparent time data in addition to the real-time data. So that's it from me today. Thank you for coming to the talk. With this, I invite any questions and comments. If you don't have any, that would be understandable, but I still encourage you if you have any comments and observations. And if you don't, I'll continue to speak. What I did in this talk was I drew examples.
I have one question.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, thank you for the very interesting studies. You cited Prabodh Pandit when you said caste is not, I did not get you correctly. Caste is not the only determining factor, something in that lines you said.
Yeah.
But it is also observable that in India, caste is used to identify language variation. So if we go to the South Indian languages, there are Brahmin varieties, non-Brahmin varieties, common varieties, and so on and so forth. So even in a situation where caste may not be the only factor, but caste is used as the labeling term.
I think, Niranjan, this is an old story. I would ask you to go back and read 2 of my papers that I would send you the references for. So without elaborating back, I think one has to locate what appeared, the surveys which appeared from South India on Brahmin and non-Brahmin, the initial ones, right? But if you go back through the studies as they progress within South India, they actually showed that there is no isolation between the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins. There is a lot of interaction between these 2 groups. So there is no social isolation as such, which would be responsible for resulting in totally 2 different kinds of dialects or whatever it is. right? And two, Brahmins, being a Brahmin doesn't mean that there is strict divide between Brahmin and the non-Brahmin dialects, and that the non-Brahmin speech variants wouldn't show up or wouldn't form part of the Brahmin dialects. So this has been shown way back by Brighton Ramanujan also, where they changed their findings, where they revised their understanding and findings. Even Gumfers, who first talked about caste-based stratification of a North Indian village, revised and admitted and revised his understanding based on the finding that came from Pandit and others. So what these subsequent studies are basically trying to tell you is that
Ma'am, if I may interrupt 1 second. No, it is
Mhm.
not about, what linguists have observed. The communities themselves identify their varieties with their caste names. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right, right. But you see, the point is, this is your assumption, right? This is a layman's assumption. The point is, you can experiment this and find out whether they can figure out by speech, whether somebody is a Brahmin or a non-Brahmin. And let's not forget that much of these surveys that appeared are also located in the Brahmin, on the caste politics initiated by the British, which ultimately led to the reservations for the non-Brahmins. So there's a whole lot to this. Simplistic observations that, oh, I can hear that person and tell. We often ask, what if you hear somebody's talking without knowing or without seeing the face? Can you tell where a person is from? Very often people claim they do, but they actually cannot. This we have done in several cases. It happens to whether you can identify a Muslim speech. No, you cannot. Similarly, I mentioned or didn't mention that Sunny actually conducted this experiment. Despite she was told a lot of stories about caste-based atrocities, etc., etc. But when she asked people to identify, they actually couldn't. And they also couldn't come up with a hierarchy. They rather rated them, say, yeah, more or less equal and so on. So, to understand caste, we don't take caste as the British would like us to understand. Caste has been misread. Caste had a different purpose that it served in the earlier India. These are like knowledge-based communities which practiced and monopolized one kind of knowledge. That is how these things have happened over a period of time due to the whatever happened in the agrarian system. The system really went out of control and became something else. And then came the colonial period, which further resulted in further devastation and uprooted and messed up the entire system and our understanding. So let's not go by simplistic such understanding and divisions. Moreover, caste is not like class either, right? So as I suggest, instead of taking a lot of time on this one, this is a well settled issue and amply discussed. If you send me an email, I can share some works where you can read and satisfy yourself. So there's a lot of work that is available which has countered this. So all it is showing is that you may carry an identity on your sleeve. I mean, if you read the recent article which has appeared in DLA, despite Kohima is so multi-ethno-linguistic, right? And you would like to believe that, oh, you can identify by listening to Nagamese that somebody is an Ao, somebody is a Lotha, etc., etc. But the point is that regardless of your history of migration for the subsequent generations, remember the target of learning is the same. So there is a rise of a new urban identity in Kohima, Nagaland, and there's an absence of ethnolex in the sense that when we ask people, we played them excerpts of speech and we asked them to identify whether this person is a Naga or not a Naga, from your community, not a community. If not from your community, which community? People could say my community or not community to that extent, but they couldn't say pinpoint which community. And in the case of children, they couldn't even say that. Okay, so I think that's where you need to appreciate a shift from the so-called self-data driven studies versus the accountable experimental based studies which help us understand us better than what we have been told how to understand ourselves. So it's going to stop in 10 minutes, but we'll continue talking. And if there is still discussion going on, we'll come back again. So are there any more? Yeah. So I suggest, Gopur, you go back and read all those things. Yeah.
Sorry. Good afternoon, ma'am. It was an interesting talk. My a question, or probably I wanted more clarity on the status of English being a global language. Now, as we see, the society is becoming more flattened. And of course, the difference between the standard and vernacular probably is shortening. So, what is your point of view about English being given the status, or for how long this status can be enjoyed by the language English? Since we see there, like, lots of varieties of English is emerging now.
Yeah, good question. English has emerged as the business lingua franca globally because of the mobility that is happening, driven by the new ways of making capital, new ways of knowledge, businesses and trades, etc. So people are increasingly moving internationally across the world, right? Every city is becoming increasingly diverse, and it is this, together with the influence of the economic influence of the political influence of the America, which has been responsible for making English as a lingua franca. That's one. Since you asked me too many questions into one, right? But in this process, and the colonization itself has multiplied Englishes, thereby producing multiple newer varieties of Englishes and not one. The standard, non-standard that you talk about, that comes from somewhere else, as I talked about, I think, in my earlier talk. It comes basically from the monocultural ideology of the West, and it is very firmly grounded in the West even today. Where I'll show you maybe towards my later talk about this. So it's a very vertical model where the so-called standard, the national languages became very important and were treated as the language or the standard languages, and the rest of the diversity was reduced to non-standard. So that's a vertical hierarchical model of high and low, prestige and no prestige, high class, low class, etc., that we get from the West. But if you move away from the West and look at India and similar multicultural societies elsewhere, as I showed Asia Pacific, which is why it becomes important, we do not have a vertical model or a hierarchical model of diversity, though we have been given to believe that this is, rather it's a more horizontal egalitarian model where the relationship among languages are not necessarily conditioned by their official status. Official languages are of no social consequence. So going back to Nagaland, it is the Nagamis which accounts for bulk of the interaction in a day across groups, whether it is in the office, whether it is in the market or any public place, right? English as a state official language is of no consequence. In fact, its usage is very, very restricted. Nagamis doesn't even have any overt prestige, but still that has not stopped Nagamis from growing, and it is growing, right? And it is not disappeared. So in the case of India, it doesn't matter. English is a language of education. That's all. But it has become over a period of time one among the regional or local languages. So if English entered into the domains of regional languages have equally intruded into the domains of English. And one evidence you can see on our news channels, prime time English news channels, I showed in one of my study, the anchor, the host, and the guest, they took about equal number of terms in a turns, starting in English, switching to Hindi, going back to English, going back to Hindi. So they were like as many as about 30 turns that happened during that 30 minutes of interview, right? In an English prime news channel. Similarly, you can take everyday conversation so English and regional languages have entered into a new relationship where we use them. So what happens in a multilingual scenario is the following. People make use of all the linguistic resources that are available to them at their disposal. First of all, it expands your dictionary, your lexicon, so you draw upon them. And some which happen to be more frequently used become more and more formed, and more you must be coming across expressions like something like karo, leave on karo, and stuff like that. It's happening everywhere, right? And you have media which is not dubbed across languages. languages. So we shouldn't worry much about this. Changes happen on their own, regardless of the policies. So Sri Lanka is an example which switched to regional medium education from English and rewrote all their books in Sinhala. But look, within 10 years, it did not stop English from coming up again. English continued to grow because policies affect only government controlled schools, not the private schools, right? And businesses demand or they employ people who have English competence. So there are so many people who are here part of the play and not just state as we tend to think and speakers. So that makes it a complex situation if you take only one factor in mind and say English is the most prestigious language of the elite. That is no longer true. It has already made inroads across the social strata. So I don't think we have to worry about that. Okay.
Of course, ma'am, I agree to all of the points which you have just addressed. Just taking, I mean, just now we were discussing about the society, I mean, the kind of stratification we have in India and the West. So in the West, the society has been sort of stratified on the basis of like, class basis. It's a more, class basis, upper class, lower class, middle class. But now as we see, and the urbanization is happening, especially in the metros, English sort of becoming kind of first language to the kids, where, I mean, of course we are bringing in the elitism here. Take example of Mumbai, Delhi. Parents, both the parents, I mean, of course education plays an important role. Both the parents, they try to communicate to children, and mostly children are picking English as their first language.
I will stop you here. I will stop you here. This is
Yeah,
again a
sure.
common popular perception. Look at the Delhi top English medium schools. Large number of children from middle class families come to school without knowing any English. So much so that if you ask them what's your name, they say मुझे अंग्रेजी नहीं आती है. Okay, so these are common popular perceptions. Hindi is here to stay. The regional languages are here to stay. If English has all English has done is it has replaced or it is replacing literacy in the regional languages very fast. But that's all. Apart from that, there is a vernacular boom in the print media. If you leave education aside, whether it is the choice of newspapers, entertainment, industry, music, English comes last. It is not the first choice. It is the last choice. So along with the growth of English education, it is accompanied by strengthening of the regional languages in varieties of other domains simultaneously. And I said, we find it in the university, in the formal meetings, how much Hindi, because Delhi is a Hindi speaking area, how much Hindi actually intrudes into those meetings. So that's not a right observation, right? And maybe one casual, see, most of the time what we observe is not neutral. It is conditioned by how we are made to think. And as a part of the first training in social linguistics, we have to learn how to observe without being colored by our own assumptions that we have carried with them. Very often you find what you expect to find, and that is precisely what we have to move away, because there's a difference between what we think it is and what it really is. And that's where the first lesson of learning social linguistics actually begins. And I think that would answer your questions. Again, if you send me an email, I can share a paper.
Sure,
We'll be
sure,
logged
sure.
out in a minute's time. So if there is a still discussion, we can log back. But please come up with any comments and observations. And also, I would be happy if you identify yourself. So the person who just asked question, can you identify yourself, please? Where you
Yes,
are?
I'm Dr. Shireen, and I am as of now working here as an assistant professor in Geetham University, situated in Bangalore campus. Like I'm
In
working at
Bangalore.
Bangalore campus. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you must
Yeah.
have seen that how Kannada has also become stronger in Bangalore.
Yes. But I have just spent here. I mean, I am here from past 2 years. Primarily, I was in Hyderabad, but I can see whatever you have been speaking and just kind of examples you have just provided. I have lots of Nagamese friends, and whatever just you spoke, I could very well correlate with the findings.
Recording in progress.
I'm sorry, I think it got disconnected in between. Yes,
Well, right.
and yeah,
We knew
I also have a kind of doubt. Just now, we were having a discussion on the caste dialect, and the work you have presented by Kumar, where it's mentioned that it's no more the caste. I mean, the dialectal variation is no more. Can be distinguished based on caste, but also occupation plays an important role. If I'm correct, that was the observation.
look here. First of all,
Yes.
don't generalize any finding across India or across different settings. What we call social linguistics is a study of a speech community, that a language can be understood only by locating it in time and a slice of space, right? You cannot
Absolutely,
talk
absolutely,
about English and then say English. English means nothing unless you say which English are we talking about, okay? So
absolutely.
coming
Yes.
back to your observation, it's not that at one time it was. Having a cultural identity is one thing, but that does not imply that language is also an indicator of that or a marker of that identity. That is what I'm trying to say. It's not that caste was a indicator of one's dialect. That we actually don't know, right? What
So,
we are
ma'am,
talking
caste. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm sorry. There's so many questions in my mind. So, caste is not the social marker, particularly when we consider Bihar, because what I have observed, the Maithili Brahmins and the Rajputs, they do make a kind of distinction in terms of pronunciation and also the way the pitch, probably. And when pronunciation and pitch comes into picture, probably that is one of the marker that these two varieties are different.
assumptions, madam. Talk about data and talk about evidence. Assumptions are not good enough when we talk about things here. Assumptions
Uh,
cannot overrule. No, assumptions cannot overrule the findings. All I'm trying to say is that these are popular assumptions that we need to move away from. There's a difference between folk beliefs and popular assumptions that creep into our thinking, and also in what we expect from the structure of a particular language. I can give you n number of examples how such beliefs, folk beliefs, influence how we understand a language and its structure, and also how we understand ourselves and the society. But that's precisely that we need to move away from, right?
yes, I mean, I understand what you were saying. Unfortunately, I am from that region, but I don't understand. I
Doesn't
mean, I can
matter.
understand.
Having a
Yeah,
membership from a particular region doesn't mean
exactly.
that you are
Yes.
above. Listen. It doesn't mean that you are above what you see around. In fact, very often, being a member of the community, we may overlook certain things. So there are certain things which are part of our thinking. They have become part of our thinking, and we have become tuned to think like that. But objectivity is different from subjectivity. And this is where research and knowledge comes into the picture, that we want to inform ourselves based on knowledge production and not based on what we tend to think it is. That is not how it is.
No, absolutely, because I cannot, and of course, I cannot understand that language. I mean, though I'm born and brought up in that region, so of course, Mathli, that's that particular region, so I cannot comment on that. But probably, my father, he understood Mathli very well, and I have heard. I mean, again, I have heard people saying that he speaks the Brahmin, variety of Mathili. So that's how, I mean, that particular thought came into mind, and it was, people used to distinguish it from the distinguish it from the Rajput variety of Maithili. So of course, since I don't have a data, I mean, I I cannot be judgmental about it.
That's all right. That's all right. See, these are
Yeah.
assumptions. All I can add to this is fine. See, today, in today's time, with a lot of rise of the new caste-based identities in Bihar, that's also so true. But caste now it has been transformed into more of regional identities than anything else, right? I'm talking about Angikas and Bajikas and so on and so forth, right?
Of course. Yes.
So
Yes.
today, Maithili-speaking Brahmins feel that when they look at how the language is changing, they feel they are the custodians of that language. That's fine. But the point is here, which I didn't go into the detail of Kumar's study, who is from Bihar and who has been doing extensive work over the past few years, doing Dalit geography and doing caste and other base surveys, shown that though caste seems significant in isolation here, but when you cross-tabulate it with other factors like profession, then you find that caste in isolation is not important, in the sense that a Brahmin speech would vary depending upon depending on his occupation. Not all Brahmins are practicing priests, right? They are shopkeepers, they are teachers, and they are indulged in other kinds of professions. So this is where he was talking about that. All right. So I would suggest when that research comes out, I mean, I did not share the details of it because this is still research in progress, and I wouldn't be doing good by sharing on this public platform some of the unpublished research, right? But when that research comes up, or when he happens to present or give a talk somewhere, please listen to that, okay?
Sure, sure, definitely. It is a pleasure listening to you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Any other questions and comments? See, I wouldn't want to go into the basics. That's not what the purpose of these talks have been. If people are interested in basics because they don't have training, and I think that's probably the right place to start with, but that would require a different platform altogether. All right. I mean, I wanted to comment on the state of affairs of social science and humanities in South Asia, but I wouldn't do it because this talk is being recorded and this would go on YouTube. So that requires a different offline or off-record platform. Yes. Any other questions, concerns, doubts? Even our earlier grammatical traditions, not the older ones, even the newer ones, which continued which started in the mid 20th century, were also hugely data driven, either because they had access to a lot of literary sources and their own knowledge. In fact, their accounts come much closer than the accounts that we have subsequently, which are driven by data created by self. So, we have to take a leaf from that and see how we can reorient linguistics in India in a more accountable and a more objective direction.
Of course, ma'am, linguistics as a discipline is not probably, I mean, I'm also working in Department of English. So English as a discipline as a whole is not something which is getting recognized as it should be. That is my primary concern.
English. I think English has overtaken most of the other disciplines. A lot of jobs are going only to English. Where are you?
No,
Don't try
absolutely.
about
So
English anymore. No, English English was not selling, so English has undergone a sea change in its curriculum. Look at the curriculum at Delhi University. English is not just English anymore. So people are not teaching the English, the British literature and so on. That is not the idea of literature anymore. The idea of literature itself has transformed to include all other aspects of literature. It's also oral, it's also performative. I don't have I don't have an expertise to talk about literature, but there have been changes. So, ma'am, please upgrade what you are saying.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we are in the process of upgradation, but linguistics as a discipline in India itself now, I mean, it is not getting the recognition it deserves. That's what I'm saying, ma'am.
It's true of social sciences and humanities in general. Linguistics is not alone, and one needs to understand those causes, which I said I wouldn't want to talk about it on this platform.
Of course, yes.
Any other comments, observations, please?
I think there are no more questions.
Okay.
So now it was an excellent speech. Actually, we enjoyed, and I think there is no other question. So I request Mr. Manu to propose vote of thanks. Manu is here. ISDL said his field of specialization. Tamil.
Okay. Now, dear all, now we are in the concluding phase of online lecture series on Sociolinguistics by Professor Shobha. She covered all the domains of social linguistics, essentials, Western perspectives, and an overview of sociolinguistic research in India. She traversed all the aspects of social linguistics in a context which will be useful for any social science student or for researchers, particularly in linguistics and anthropology. The deliberations connected with the subject also enrich the participants. I extend our thanks to Professor Shobha on behalf of ISDN. I extend our thanks to Honorable Director, Professor G.K. Panikar, for planning and fruitfully executing this series of lectures. Very special thanks to ISDN team, technical team, researchers for making this lecture series to reach across the globe beyond the technical constraints. Thanks to Mr. Tribhudas, Agash Bhatt, and Arun Pandit. Thanks to all supporting researchers and staff officers of our ISDL. Finally, ISDL extends their thanks to all those who joined and attended this online lecture series. Thank you all.
Thank you, participants. Thank